On through the terminal when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from Darius containing a link to the digital invitation for the wedding reception at the Rittenhouse. Below the link was a brief message explaining that while they still did not expect me to attend, they wanted to ensure I had the full event details in case I wished to send a thoughtful gift. I stared at the screen and allowed myself a quiet smile. The sheer arrogance of the gesture was almost impressive. They were so utterly convinced that I was defeated, broke, and stranded thousands of miles away, that they could not help but throw one last insult across the ocean. They truly believed that a $15 transit card and a few cruel words had broken my spirit forever. I did not reply to the text. Instead, I tapped the screen to open my rideshare application and booked a private luxury sedan to take me directly to my financial advisor's office downtown. Mr. Cho was waiting for me in his corner suite overlooking the city skyline, a thick manila folder resting on the polished mahogany desk between us. As I took a seat, he handed me a set of certified bank statements alongside the updated property registry documents from my former residence. The legal team had worked tirelessly over the past 3 months to track down every single asset, every forgotten account, and every detail regarding the mechanics lien I had placed on the estate decades ago. When Mr. Cho walked me through the figures, the picture became crystal clear. Garrison was not a wealthy venture capitalist at all. He was a leveraged fraud who was running out of time. According to the official land registry filings, Garrison had attempted to secure a massive second mortgage against my former house to fund his lavish lifestyle and cover the outrageous expenses of the upcoming wedding. However, when the bank performed a routine title search, they discovered the active mechanics lien carrying my original signature. To bypass this obstacle without notifying me, someone had forged my name on a formal lien release document and submitted it to the county clerk 3 weeks prior. Mr. Cho looked at me over his reading glasses, his expression grave, and explained that this single act of forgery constituted a severe federal crime. Furthermore, forensic accounting revealed that Garrison had been quietly siphoning money from Nan's remaining divorce settlement to pay off pressing debts from previous failed business ventures. I leaned back in the plush leather chair and absorbed the information with absolute calm. A lesser man might have flown into a rage, called the authorities immediately, or stormed the venue to make a scene. But I have spent my entire life working with high-voltage electricity. When you are dealing with lethal currents, you never act out of anger or panic. You wait for the exact right moment to throw the main breaker. I instructed Mr. Cho to coordinate directly with our senior legal counsel and have the county prosecutor prepare the necessary paperwork, but I gave him one specific instruction. The official notice was not to be delivered to Garrison at his office or his apartment. It was to be served publicly at the wedding reception in front of every single guest. He was trying so desperately to impress. The evening of the wedding arrived with a heavy downpour that slicked the streets of Philadelphia in reflective shades of amber and red. I arrived at the grand entrance of the Rittenhouse Hotel shortly after 8 o'clock. Stepping out of the sedan into the cool night air, the lobby was filled with the faint sound of a live string quartet and the chatter of well-dressed guests filtering toward the main ballroom. I adjusted the cuffs of my bespoke suit, checked my reflection in the gilded mirrors near the entrance, and walked forward with a measured, confident stride. As I approached the double doors of the ballroom, two formal ushers stepped into my path, their eyes scanning my face with confusion before looking down at their digital guest rosters. I simply gave them a calm nod and walked past them before they could even utter a word. The ballroom was a sea of crystal chandeliers, white orchids, and polished silver. At the center of the room, standing on a raised dais near a 5-tiered wedding cake, were Nan and Garrison. She was wearing an extravagant white gown that looked far too youth-seeking for her years, while he stood beside her in a custom tuxedo, holding a glass of vintage champagne and laughing loudly with a group of local executives. Darius and Brianna were standing nearby, swirling their drinks and soaking in the reflected glamour of the event. I moved quietly along the perimeter of the room, taking a position near the main press table where a process server in a plain dark suit was already waiting patiently for my signal. No one noticed my presence at first, as all eyes were fixed on the stage. Garrison took the microphone from the band leader, clearing his throat to deliver a grand speech about his vision for the future, his endless resources, and how he had rescued Neen from a life of mediocrity. He spoke with the smooth, practiced cadence of a salesman who had spent his entire life pitching dreams he could never fulfill. Neen beamed beside him, looking around the room as if she had finally achieved the social standing she believed she had always deserved. Darius nodded in eager agreement at every sentence, completely blind to the reality of the man standing before him. As Garrison reached the climax of his speech, boasting about his upcoming international expansion and multi-million-dollar investments, I caught the eye of the process server and gave him a short, decisive nod. The man stepped forward smoothly, cutting across the floor with quiet authority. He ascended the steps of the dais, reached into his jacket pocket, and handed a thick, sealed legal envelope directly to Garrison mid-sentence. Garrison paused, his smile freezing as he looked down at the document in his hand. "What is the meaning of this?" Garrison demanded, his voice echoing through the microphone and amplifying across the silent room. The process server simply stated in a clear, carrying tone that Garrison was being formally served with a cease and desist order, a notice of grand jury investigation for document forgery, and an immediate freeze on all assets associated with the property. The microphone caught every single word, broadcasting the devastating truth to all 500 distinguished guests. Neen let out a sharp, piercing scream that shattered the silence of the room, her face draining of all color as she grabbed Garrison's arm in sheer panic. The entire ballroom descended into hushed whispers and shocked gasps as guests began looking at one another in total disbelief. Garrison tried to maintain his composure, but his hands were trembling so violently that his champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the wooden floor. Darius stood frozen in place, his mouth open, staring at the legal papers as if his entire world had just collapsed around him. It was at that exact moment that Neen glanced toward the perimeter of the room and caught sight of me standing calmly near the back, my hands rested comfortably in my pockets, watching the spectacle with quiet detachment. Her eyes went wide with absolute terror as the reality of her situation hit her all at once. She realized in a single terrifying second that the man she had written off as a broke, helpless retired electrician had systematically uncovered every lie her new husband had built his life upon. The wealthy venture capitalist was broke, the dream house was tied up in federal fraud allegations, and the man she had humiliated was standing before her looking more powerful and composed than ever before. I did not say a word. I simply held her gaze for 3 long seconds, allowed a brief, knowing smile to touch my lips, and then turned on my heel to exit the ballroom, leaving the chaotic fallout behind me as the authorities stepped into the foyer. I returned to my hotel suite, poured myself a glass of aged scotch, and stood by the window watching the rain wash over the city streets below. At precisely 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone began to ring on the nightstand. I picked it up and saw Darius's name flashing on the screen. When I answered, his voice was broken, shaking, and completely stripped of the arrogant confidence he had displayed months prior. "Dad," he sobbed openly into the receiver, "please answer me. Everything is gone." Garrison was taken in for questioning. The bank froze all the accounts, and Mom is having a complete nervous breakdown. We have nowhere to go and no money left. "Dad, please, we need your help. What are we supposed to do now?" I listened to his desperate pleas in complete silence, hearing the genuine panic in his breath as he waited for a lifeline that would never arrive. I thought about the cold afternoon in the parking lot, the greasy transit card floating in the puddle, and the dismissive way he had called another man an upgrade. I took a slow sip of my drink, letting the burn settle in my chest before I finally spoke. "You told me 6 months ago that I was small time, Darius," I said, my voice completely steady and void of anger. "You told me that Garrison was a man who knew how to build real wealth and open doors that I could never unlock. It seems he has opened a very specific door for you tonight, and now you have to walk through it." There was a long, painful pause on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of his ragged breathing as the weight of my words sank in. "Dad, please," he begged softly. "Don't do this to us. We are your family." I drew a deep, quiet breath and looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. "Family is built on loyalty, respect, and truth, Darius," I told him calmly. "It is not something you trade away for a shiny illusion, and it is certainly not something you only remember when the lights go out." I reached into my pocket, pulled out the greasy transit card I had kept as a reminder, and placed it neatly on the glass tabletop. "I hope you saved that card I gave you," I added softly. "You're going to need it." I ended the call before he could say another word, turned off the phone, and set it face down on the table. The silence that filled the room was no longer heavy or painful. It was clean, pure, and completely peaceful. I packed my leather carry-on, checked out of the hotel before sunrise, and boarded the first morning flight back to Portugal. As the plane climbed through the clouds over the Atlantic, leaving the noise and betrayal of my old life far behind, I closed my eyes and let the steady hum of the engines carry me home. I had spent 40 years wiring complex systems for other people, but as I looked out at the rising sun, I knew that I had finally built the one thing that truly mattered, a life powered entirely by my own strength.